Well, the music tells me that I'm on the air. It's time to start another episode of Disclosure, wherever you are. I'm mostly glad that you're listening today. Mostly.
Mostly.
No, I'm glad you're here. My name is Sean Boonstra. Unless you don't like me, then my name is Gene Boonstra. And then you can write all the complaint letters. Yeah.
Gene can be a guy's name.
Jean. It's French then, right? Oh, it's
That's
Gene with a G.
Right.
And you are not Gene with a G, you are Gene with a J.
Yes.
That could become a tongue twister, couldn't it?
Definitely.
Gene with a G,
Quickly.
Gene with a J, Gene with a G, Gene with a J. For the next 58 minutes or so, you poor people, I'm going to be your host from the Voice of Prophecy studios in beautiful downtown Loveland, Colorado. It's like you should have, like right after I say that, an angel should sing. Right. Here in the Voice of Prophecy studios in beautiful downtown Loveland. Oh.
You did it. You went there. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And as you know already, sitting in studio today is my better behaved half, Gene Boonstra, producer for Discovery Mountain, our award-winning children's, I mispronounced the word children, our award-winning children's radio drama. What is going on in the world of radio drama, my good wife?
With Discovery Mountain, well, there's always a lot going on. We're always just about ready for the next production. So it seems like the cycle of pre-production, production, post-production is constantly happening. But you know what's fairly new still, Sean, is that we have something new from Discovery Mountain every single week. So we don't have a full episode every week. We just have 24 of those a year, which is still a lot. But on the weeks without a full episode, we have what we call a mini episode. So every single Wednesday, there's something new from Discovery Mountain on the website to listen to.
And let me ask this, just, you know, for no particular reason at all, does Chaplain Simon get more lines in the coming season?
I don't know. Is Chaplain Simon around very much, or is he on an evangelistic series and going to Myanmar and all kinds of other stuff?
Yeah, maybe that's the problem.
That's the problem.
For those who haven't guessed, I am Chaplain Simon.
You are.
The most disappointing character
No, you're
on
not.
Discovery
You're a
Mountain.
good
Oh, come on.
character.
Kids don't like Chaplain Simon.
They do. And you know.
They don't. No, come on. I get out of a car and people say, hey, you're with Discovery Mountain. These children mob me, and then they find out I'm Chaplain Simon and they dissipate. It's like, you're
You know
not
who-
cool like Jake Donovan.
No, Jake is the coolest.
Yeah.
And the funniest. But you know what I find so much fun? Whenever I'm traveling somewhere and I meet kids who listen to Discovery Mountain, I always ask them who their favorite character is. And you know,
And
I'd
it's Chaplain
say
Simon.
yeah, Chaplain Simon. You know, 8 times out of 10,
Yeah.
their favorite character is Gadget the dog.
Really?
Which is so cute to me because we make that character with sound effects.
So at what
Yeah.
point, at some point though, Gadget's going to get like hydrophobia, right? He's going to get rabies and you're going to have to shoot him. It'll be like
No.
old Yeller.
Oh no, definitely not. The kids would never forgive me if we did that to Gadget.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, honest, yes or no? Did you cry at Old Yeller?
You know, I don't have a memory of watching it until I was an adult.
No, we
I'm
read the
sure I
book.
did, or reading the book. I don't remember.
We read the book
that
because I
terrible?
lived so long ago
Yeah.
that they didn't have television in the days when I
Yes,
heard
they
about
did.
Old Yeller.
Yeah, they did.
I didn't cry. It was just really dusty in the room.
Oh, is that?
I was
that
8.
How it was?
I was 8
Okay.
and I was in the dust. So, hey,
I
did
cried
you hear?
as an adult
Did you hear
watching it.
about? Apparently, we got to get to our topic for today. But apparently, Harvard University has declared now there's this weird oblong asteroid way out on the edge of our solar system, and Harvard is saying, you know what that is? That's an exploratory spaceship from another civilization, we
Yeah,
think,
an
and it
alien.
kind of got lost here, and it was on its way to study Earth. And then what they do is paint a picture of a giant rock. How that's a spaceship is beyond me.
Well, didn't they say it was like a probe, an alien probe from another planet come to investigate us and something went wrong? Yeah. Very strange. Very strange.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. Flying
Weird
saucers.
news.
We managed to cover flying saucers and Old Yeller in the same show.
We did.
Yeah.
Well, I think we should get to our topic today.
Yeah, probably. Probably.
But it's interesting. It's
Just as interesting as shooting
this
Gadget.
side discussion has been. But Sean, we're going to talk about the Shroud of Turin.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
right. I know that some of our younger listeners might be wondering, what is the Shroud of Turin? But when I was a kid, Shroud of Turin was pretty famous. It was all the rage. And
Definitely.
back in those days, back in the old days before television and back before we had fancy motor cars and things like now, back when I was a kid, people were publishing books about the Shroud and making documentaries about the Shroud. And then it seems in recent years it just kind of dropped off the radar. Maybe it's not cool anymore. So I thought, hey, why don't we bring it back on the radar, because I'm not done with it yet. I still think it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I agree. Well, maybe because it's not in the forefront of people's minds as much nowadays, why don't you give us a little background for those who aren't as familiar with it?
Yeah, probably a good idea. The Shroud of Turin, or Turin. How do you say it?
I always say Turin myself. That's how I grew up saying it.
Huh.
Doesn't mean it's correct.
We should just put a what do you call it, like a poll on Twitter. Do you say Turin or Turin?
Yeah.
And of course the Italians would be right. The Shroud of Turin is basically a long strip of linen. It's about 14 and a half feet long, so just a little over, it's like 2.5 times as long as me, and 3 times as long as you.
I knew you were going somewhere. I could see the grin on your face.
So 14 and a half feet long, 3.5 feet wide. It's a burial cloth.
Right.
So if you fold this thing 14 feet long and some change, you fold it in half. I'm demonstrating on the radio how to fold it in half because everybody can see me.
People can
you can watch this, right?
Don't forget.
Okay. Well, you take this thing lengthwise, fold it in half, and it's a little over 7 feet long, which is about the right size to cover a body. So you put the person on the cloth so their head is in the middle of the cloth. Then you take the rest of the cloth, pull it over their body down to their feet, kind of making a little body envelope, I guess, with it. A burial shroud.
Okay.
Now, here's what's unusual about the Shroud of Turin. We find lots of these old burial shrouds, but this one's unusual in the fact that you have an image of a man burned into the cloth.
Yes.
And the head is in the middle. So on one half of the cloth, the part that would have been pulled down over his face, you have a picture of the front of this man. You've got his face, his chest, his arms folded on top of him, in repose, like he's been buried. Then on the other half, right above his head, you have a picture of his back, the back of his head, his shoulder blades, and so on. So what it looks like somebody was buried in this shroud, and then somehow something happened that burned his image into the cloth. But what's really interesting is the fact that even though it's a very clearly detailed picture of a man, it's a photo negative. And it's older than photography. Right? But it's a photo negative. Remember when we used to use film in a camera, and then later on you'd look at the negatives and all the colors are reversed? It's inverted.
Right.
It's an inverted negative.
And that was a discovery that was made years after we knew about the shroud's existence, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You can see the image of a man quite clearly on the cloth itself. But back in 1898, right, the year before I was born, back in 1898.
Just 1 year before you were born.
Well, my kids don't know that.
Yeah,
my kids,
not.
Our kids struggled. Remember the day I told them that when I was a kid, I knew people born in the 1800s? No, you didn't. Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Because when I was a kid, they were in their 70s.
That's right.
Yeah. Anyway, back in 1898, there's an Italian photographer by the name of Secondo Pia. And he was allowed to take pictures of the shroud, and that's when he discovered that the image in the cloth is a photographic negative. Because the negative of that photo was actually a detailed photo of a man.
Yeah,
he develops it and his negatives look right. It's kind of mind-blowing. And that means that if somebody had actually painted this man on the cloth way back when in the medieval period, as some people suspect, some people say it's got to be a forgery, whoever did that knew about photo negatives hundreds of years before the invention of photography. And so, of course, supporters of the shroud say that seems really unlikely.
Yeah, very unlikely. And that's what makes the shroud very interesting. But it's not just the mysterious image on the cloth that gets people interested, is it? There's also the suspicion that this cloth is actually the burial cloth used to bury Jesus. And what people think might have happened is that when Jesus rose from the dead on the third day, whatever process happened during his resurrection burned a negative image of Jesus himself on that piece of cloth. And if that were true, that would mean that we have a photograph of Jesus.
Right. But of course, the big question is whether or not it's true.
Yeah.
And that's where the controversy arises around the shroud because, well, as we all know, or at least admit these days, there were a lot of relics and forgeries going around Western Europe during the medieval period. And the reason we had these forgeries is that they were designed to attract people with their money to certain towns and churches. And some forgeries were actually designed on purpose to shore up unsubstantiated claims the organized church was making, and people were starting to doubt some of those claims.
What were some of those claims?
Well, I think the most famous example would be the donation of Constantine. Now, the donation of Constantine is a document that's purported to be authored by Constantine the Great. And in that document, in that letter, he's giving the Western Roman Empire, basically Western Europe, to the Bishop of Rome as a gift, or at least giving him political authority over it. And it's said that he wrote that letter either in 315 or 317 A.D., that he wrote this donation to the Pope. And the reason that the letter gives, why would Constantine give his empire away like that, or the western half, is because, well, they say he had leprosy, and he was converted and baptized by the Bishop of Rome, and when he was baptized, he was miraculously healed, and he was so grateful, he gives away his empire. It's not even substantial, because we know he waited to the end of his life to get baptized. He wasn't baptized in 315 or 317 A.D., so right out of the gate, we know there's something fishy about this. But they love this letter because the letter declares the city of Rome is now primary over the other 4 key Christian cities of the day.
And of course, in those days, in addition to Rome, there were other key centers of Christian influence.
Yeah, absolutely. There were 5. Rome in the beginning, in the first centuries of Christianity, was not the preeminent city. There were really 5 sort of key centers of influence. You had Rome, you had Alexandria in North Africa, you had Antioch in Syria, you had Constantinople in what is now Turkey. It was modern-day Istanbul. And, of course, you had Jerusalem, ground zero for the Christian movement. And in the very beginning, in the first centuries of Christianity, those key bishops were all considered equals. And the Bishop of Rome wanted to build the case that he was first among equals. And by Constantine's day, that was already kind of an assumption with some people, because he brought the Bishop of Rome into a couple of key disputes that were raging inside Christianity in his new empire, Constantine's new empire.
Okay. And so the key disputes were the Donatist controversy in North Africa and the Arian controversy, which spilled out of North Africa into the rest of the empire.
Exactly. The Donatist controversy happened because under Diocletian persecutions, a lot of Christians fled their posts in North Africa, and when the persecution ended, they wanted to come back and take their jobs back, and the church wouldn't have them. The Arian controversy was a heretic priest named Arius who was teaching an alternate view on the divinity of Christ, or the lack thereof, in his opinion. And the Christian church themselves could not deal with the problem. They couldn't settle the dispute. But then they suddenly realized, hey, you know what? This new emperor, Constantine, is not hostile to Christianity. In fact, he's friendly to us. He's even giving us back the property that Diocletian stole from us. And he's declaring us to be the new religion of the Roman Empire. He's Christian friendly. But of course, Constantine, he's really, really busy. He's running his new empire. He's trying to hold the pieces together globally, or at least globally in the Roman understanding. And so he starts turning these cases over to the Bishop of Rome. Miltiades was his name, and that sort of featured him and started to raise his stock value in some people's minds, right? He's becoming more important, and it seems like the Bishop of Rome might be the emperor's favorite. I don't see the music. I hear the music, unless you have dysphonia. If you have dysphonia, you see sounds and you hear colors and stuff like that. That is not what's going on. But I'll tell you what is going on.
We're going to take a break.
A commercial break. We're going to take a commercial break. And when we come back, I'll tell you a little bit more about the donation of Constantine and the claims we built on it.
Disclosure is just one of the programs brought to you by the Voice of Prophecy, like the audio adventure program Discovery Mountain. Discovery Mountain is a weekly Bible-based program for kids of all ages and backgrounds. Your family will enjoy faith-building stories with Jake Donovan, Mr. Simon, and others in this small mountain town. Each summer, campers visit Discovery Mountain, where they sing songs, learn about God, and reenact a Bible story with the help of drama teachers Miss Wendy and Miss Tamara. With 24 full episodes every year and programming every week, your family will have something uplifting to listen to every week. Listen to episodes on demand and watch video features from Director Doug at discoverymountain.com or on your favorite podcast platform. That's discoverymountain.com.
Well, there goes that break. It's over already. And there I was trying to do my taxes early.
Oh.
Get them all done in the break, but that's it. That's all the break we get.
Yep.
They work us like slaves here, folks. They were, help, send help. We were talking about the donation of Constantine as an example of some ways that we as Christians in the medieval period sort of played a little fast and loose with things. And this was a letter purporting to give dominion basically over the Western Roman Empire to the Bishop of Rome.
Right.
And in the days of Constantine, the Bishop of Rome was already starting to look like a favorite of the emperor's. His stock value is starting to go up a little bit.
Yeah. And if it was true, then it would also go a long ways towards keeping European royalty in line, politically speaking, because if the Pope was the legitimate successor to Constantine in the West, then it gave him political power over the Western Roman Empire prior, at least until its dissolution.
That's the point of the thing, right? That's the whole point of the donation, is to prove I'm the legitimate owner of all these lands.
Sure.
And back in 778 A.D., when I was a little boy, we had a case where Pope Hadrian I urges Charlemagne to make him the de facto head of the West like Constantine did. Hey, make me the head of the West. And we have to believe that he was referencing the donation of Constantine because it's the only known source we have for that idea that Constantine gave the West to the Pope. Then in 1054, when I was a teenager, Leo IX sent a letter over to the Patriarch of Constantinople, the head of the church there, where he insists that the church in Rome has more authority than the Constantinople church, and he quotes the donation of Constantine to prove it.
And I'm sure that didn't help the tensions between East and West, because it wasn't long after that letter, of course, that the big schism took place in the church, where we literally had two leaders in the Roman Empire, two halves.
Right. And of course, if the document was legitimate, I mean, if the donation of Constantine was really authored by Constantine, maybe Leo IX had a case.
Yeah.
But in order for the donation to be authentic, it would have to have had been written in the early 4th century. And today we know that it was probably written 400 years later, sometime in the 8th century.
Okay. So how do we find out that it was a fake?
Well, we have records of people challenging the donation's authenticity all the way back to the year 1001 A.D.
Wow.
But the lid wasn't really blown off until the middle of the 15th century, in the 1400s, when Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa got fed up with the dubious claims being made by his church and declared the document to be a forgery. Then an Italian priest by the name of Lorenzo Valla made a detailed argument against the donation of Constantine by studying the language in the document very, very carefully. He was part of a movement of humanist scholars that were bringing classical learning back to the forefront of academia, and they were practicing the art of contextual criticism, or textual criticism. And he realized by comparing the donation of Constantine to other 4th century documents that it couldn't possibly be real. It's using language inappropriate to the period.
Interesting.
And it was at that point that we discovered, man, this was probably written in the 8th century.
Okay.
So that rocks the church because, well, the church had staked so much of its political authority in the West on the authenticity of that document. But now after that, we started to see this radical shift in the way the Bishop of Rome was laying claim to his temporal power. Instead of appealing to Constantine, for example, Pope Pius II starts appealing to Charlemagne or to Peter himself.
Interesting.
Right.
But Charlemagne's gift to the church was based on the donation of Constantine in the first place.
Right. So this is a big mess. It's a huge mess. And as you can imagine, and in the minds of a lot of people, it was undermining the credibility of the organized church of Western Europe. Then within a few decades, we see the Protestant Reformation taking shape. Not that the Reformation was sparked by the discovery of this forgery, because it wasn't, but it sure didn't help the thing.
Yeah. And throughout the medieval period, the trade of relics became big business for the church, big money makers, which led to a lot of dubious claims about ancient Christian relics being the possession of this or that particular church. So when somebody claims to have the burial shroud of Jesus, well, obviously that's going to raise a lot of eyebrows and stir up a bit of controversy.
Which is exactly what has happened.
Yeah.
So let's consider the shroud for a few minutes, because forgery or not, it is interesting. It's an interesting part of our Western Christian culture.
Yeah.
And it does create an opportunity to think about some of the central claims of the Christian faith. Claims that are so central that if they're not true, then well, Christianity would fall to pieces.
So where should we start?
Well, maybe let's start with history because A, you're the history major in the room, and you can check my history.
Okay.
And B, well, it's kind of a fascinating story, the history of this thing. The earliest verifiable mention we have of the Shroud of Turin and its existence in the city of Turin dates back to the year 1390.
Okay.
When the bishop of that city, at least I think he was the bishop of Turin, I'm making an assumption here, he writes a letter to the Pope, Pope Clement VII, and he mentions the existence of the Shroud. But that letter isn't good news for fans of the Shroud because the bishop says in his letter he knows it's a fake and that the artist has confessed to creating this thing.
Oh, interesting. So the first reliable mention of the Shroud declares it to be a forgery.
It does. So right out of the gate, we have a bit of a problem with the history of the Shroud.
Yeah.
But there is mention of another Shroud in another city about 40 years earlier. But we're pretty sure at this point it's not the same one. And there was another burial shroud that existed in Constantinople back in the early 1200s, but it disappeared in 1204 when a bunch of renegade crusaders from the west sacked and looted the city of Constantinople.
So it sounds like burial shrouds were sort of a thing in those days.
Yeah, they were kind of the in relic, kind of
Yeah.
the in thing. It was pretty, it's at least possible.
Okay.
It might just be that the existence of shrouds were a cultural phenomenon of the day, right? They were what would I compare them to? Well, I guess like the Pokemons of the day or something. That's inappropriate. I beg your. But it was a cultural phenomenon, a fad.
Okay.
And in the days before the internet, fads would have lasted decades instead
Sure.
of days or weeks because news traveled very slowly. A fad
Right.
could go on for 200 years. So, for example, there was a time when owning a piece of the true cross of Christ was all the rage. I have a piece of the real cross. And as news spread that this church and that church had a piece of Christ's cross, we see a competition emerging between these parishes. Well, I want to own a piece of the cross too. I want to be as popular and have people come here.
Yeah.
So today, as a result of that fad, there are enough pieces of the cross in existence to build dozens of crosses or hundreds of crosses, enough to build an entire navy, somebody once said, and sail over the ocean. There's that many pieces. Now, that's not to say that nobody out there owns a piece of the real thing.
Sure.
Because, man, it's possible, right? It's possible somebody snitched a piece of the cross afterwards. But against that idea, I mean, maybe somebody did. Maybe somebody chiseled a little piece off and kept it. But you have to consider the fact that pictures of the cross do not appear in Christian culture for, a couple of hundred years after Christ goes back to heaven. There are no pictures of the cross in most of, go down into the tombs there outside the city of Rome. Go down into the ancient tombs and you look at these pictures and you don't see crosses. The earliest Christian art shows an empty tomb, not a dying Christ.
Yes.
And it's that
Celebrating
way on
the
purpose.
resurrection.
Yeah, they celebrate the resurrection because
Right.
dying on a cross was shameful. It was one of the
Yeah.
most shameful deaths you could die. So you got to wonder who would want to keep a piece of the original cross back in those days. It would kind of like it would be like, hey, can I have a piece of the electric chair you used to, execute my father? Nobody does that.
Yeah.
It'd be a weird thing to collect.
Yeah. In the book of Galatians, Paul writes that hanging on a tree or a cross was considered a curse. It was dark, it was shameful, which made the Christian faith a really tough sell back in the first century.
Yeah, exactly. As Paul says in 1 Corinthians 1:23, the cross would prove to be a stumbling block to the Jews and foolishness to the Greeks.
Right. But if the highlight for the Christians living in the first century was the resurrection of Christ, then someone grabbing the shroud from the empty tomb, that might make sense.
Sure.
Yeah, and we know that Christ's burial cloth was there because John mentions it in John 20, verse 7, that Peter found the cloth that was wrapped around Christ's head in the tomb.
Yeah, and that's true. So I will admit right up front, it's entirely possible that the shroud is real. I'm not going to say that dogmatically because I don't know. Given the history of Western Christianity, I'm always going to have this funny gut feeling that it's a fake, probably because I've seen so many fakes.
Yeah. But didn't you tell me a while ago that you came across a relic that you think might be real?
Okay, yeah, don't write me letters about this one, but yes. This one kind of caught me by surprise. Whenever I'm in the city of Rome, I like to go visit the church that was built by Constantine's mother, Helena.
Yeah.
And of all the stories we have of Christian conversions in the time of Constantine, Helena's was actually the real deal. Constantine, did he convert? I don't know. I've always had a big question mark, as you know, about his conversion because he puts off baptism till he's dead. He murders his own family members after his supposed conversion and so on.
Right.
So I don't know. Was he? But his mother probably was the real deal, a real believer. And it was probably her influence that led Constantine to favor the Christian religion. One of the big marks that his mother, Helena, made on the city of Rome was the Basilica of the Holy Cross in Jerusalem, which is only a few blocks away from the Lateran Palace. Long blocks, but just a few blocks away. And it's called the Church of the Holy Cross in Jerusalem because Helena actually brought a bunch of dirt from Jerusalem. More accurately, she brought dirt from where they used to think Mount Golgotha, Calvary, was located. She brings it to Rome, puts it on the ground, and they built a church on top of it. So in the city of Rome, they consider that church to be part of the city of Jerusalem. And in addition to the dirt, Helena brought back some relics from Israel, from the Holy Land. And those are still on display in that church. So to the side of the main sanctuary, they have a small museum where you can see a number of her ancient trophies, including a couple of thorns, supposedly from the crown they put on Jesus' head. You can see a nail from the crucifixion of Christ, supposedly, and some pieces of wood from his cross. And the last time I was there, I think they actually had a replica of the Shroud of Turin on display, too, which kind of fits the theme.
Do you think any of those things are real?
Well, I certainly have some pretty hefty doubts, and I don't mean any disrespect by that, but anybody who's spent some time in the city of Rome should have doubts because there's too much in that city for us to take all the claims seriously.
Yeah, every church has something.
They got something, right?
Yeah.
If they had one or two things in Rome that were from the time of Jesus, you might be tempted to say, you know what, maybe that's real. But they got everything. They've got the head of Luke, the finger of Philip, and they got so much stuff that after a while it can't possibly all be real.
Right.
So I have huge doubts when it comes to those relics of the crucifixion, even the ones in Helena's church, even the ones purportedly brought back by Helena to Italy. But, and it's almost time for a break, but there is one relic in that museum that I find myself, well, how do I put this? I'm slow to discount it. I'm skeptical, but I'm slow to discount it, even though I did dismiss it as a forgery the first time that I saw it.
Are you going to tell us what it is?
No, we're about to take a break here in a few minutes, so I'm going to leave everybody hanging, or maybe that's all the time we've got for our show today. No, there is one there in Helena's church that might be real. Maybe. I'm still skeptical, but I'm willing to say maybe. After the break, we'll tell you what it is. In the meantime, I want you to listen to this offer from the good people at the Voice of Prophecy. We have a number of resources for you, your family, your children, Bible studies, children's programming, a lot of things that you can use to build your own faith in God or to explore maybe God for the first time. Grab a pen and paper. You're going to want to write down the details so that you can take advantage of these offers, and we'll be right back with the one relic that might be real.
Are you searching for answers to life's toughest questions like, where is God when we suffer? Can I find real happiness? Or is there any hope for our chaotic world? The Discover Bible Guides will help you find the answers you're looking for. Visit us at BibleStudies.com or give us a call at 888-456-7933 for your free Discover Bible Guides. Study online on our secure website or have the free guides mailed right to your home. There is never a cost or obligation. The Discover Bible Guides are our free gift to you. Find answers in guides like, Does My Life Really Matter to God? And A Second Chance at Life. You'll find answers to the things that matter most to you in each of the 26 Discover Bible Guides. Visit BibleStudies.com and begin your journey today to discover answers to life's deepest questions.
And with a wave of the hand, Harim lets me know we are back on the air. We're talking about relics, and we're ultimately talking about the Shroud of Turin, but we've taken a couple of detours and talked about some other relics, a donation of Constantine, which was a forgery. And we were talking about Helena's church, the Basilica of the Holy Cross in Jerusalem,
Right.
where it's claimed that Helena brought back relics from... Now, we know Helena, Constantine's mother, went to Jerusalem and brought some stuff back, but are these things real down there? And before the break, we were talking about one relic in particular that I used to dismiss as a forgery, but I've come to the point where I have to admit, hey, maybe... That's all I'm willing to say. Maybe.
And you didn't tell us what it was before the break. So what is it?
It's the Titulus Crucis. It's supposedly the sign they put on the cross over Jesus' head. The one, remember, that was written, said King of the Jews in three languages. Right. And it's encased in that museum in, I think it's glass and silver. And it does look pretty old. And again, everything else in the museum looks old too. But there you go.
So what made you think it might be real?
Okay, underline the word might. I'm not saying it is.
Maybe.
But a few years ago, I picked up a copy of an archaeological journal in a bookshop in San Diego. And I don't remember which one it was. Biblical Archaeological Review. Hey, if you work at the Biblical Archaeological Review and it's not from you, please forgive me. I'm just trying to remember. Whoever it was, there was an article about this Titulus Crucis, this sign. And I guess they did a forensic examination of the thing, and they said, you know what? This might actually be the real deal. There's enough here. You know, the Hebrew's written in the right direction, and that might not have happened in a medieval forgery and so on. It's not a resounding affirmation, so I'm going to give it a possible maybe.
Okay.
Right?
Possible maybe.
Possible maybe. So I'm willing to admit I might be wrong, that maybe my skepticism went too far. Maybe it's the real deal, in which case that's kind of cool. But that's not the basis on which I build my faith, whether or not that thing is real.
Right. So thinking about the Shroud of Turin, what are some of the arguments for and against it being real?
Right. Well, let's start with the arguments against it. Okay. And we're still differing on how we say that, isn't it? Shroud of Turin, Shroud of Turin.
People will hear it both ways.
Right.
Yeah.
You need to look us up on Twitter and see what you say. Let's start with the arguments against the shroud.
Okay.
Really, with the time we've got today, I'm not sure I would encourage anybody to take what we say as the last word on this subject, because there are people out there who have dedicated decades of their lives to researching the shroud.
Sure.
I'm hardly in their league, but let's take a stab at it anyway.
Okay.
In the summer of 2018, there was an article posted at the Live Science website that suggested that the shroud is probably a medieval forgery. And what they pointed out is that back in 1988, somebody carbon dated the shroud, and the results pointed to the 13th century AD instead of all the way back to the first. In other words, the shroud's medieval. 1,300 years newer than we were told.
Right. Fairly recent then in terms of history.
Right.
Yeah.
That's carbon dating.
Okay.
Then they focused on the blood stains that are on the shroud. And that's what kind of got people's attention. Where the nail prints are, there are some blood stains. There's blood running down the body of this individual. And they asked a simple question about the blood. If this was a real body, you would expect the blood stains on that shroud to look a certain way, and they don't. Right? Think CSI or something like that.
Right.
They don't match what a coroner would expect. What they did to test that, they used real and synthetic blood, which they put on volunteers. Imagine that. You know, you're the volunteer. You're going to paint you with blood, and then they stuck them in a shroud to see what you would expect to happen. And every test came out wrong, which led them to believe that the stains on the shroud, the ones that come from the hands, the feet, and the side of this individual, which is purported to be Jesus, they say, no, it's the work of a clever painter. It's not real. Here's some of that article. Here's this. I got it right here in my hands, so that you know I'm reading something, and I can read. There's the paper right there. 2 short rivulets of the blood on the back of the left hand and the shroud are only consistent with a person standing with their arms held at a 45-degree angle. In contrast, the forearm bloodstains found on the shroud match a person standing with their arms held nearly vertically. A person couldn't be in these two positions at once. The scientists did find that the bloodstains on the front of the chest did match those from a spear wound. However, the stains on the lower back, which supposedly came from the spear wound while the body was positioned on its back, were completely unrealistic, they said. Quote, if you look at the bloodstains as a whole, Just as you would when working at a crime scene, you realize they contradict each other. That points to the artificial origin of these stains." Unquote. So, on the one hand, we've got forensic examiners, the kind of people who go out and examine crime scenes, and they don't believe that the thing is real.
Okay, so that's an argument against its authenticity. But lots of people insist that it is real, even since the late 1980s. So why do they cling to that story?
Okay, well, let me say this right out of the gate, so that we don't create any false impressions. The Vatican itself has no official position on the shroud. They don't say, yes, it's real. They don't say, no, it's not.
Okay.
Although I will say that in practice and the way they speak, they certainly seem to lean in the direction of the shroud being real. But
legit.
they don't have an official position. Let's be fair about this.
Okay.
So the question is, why would anybody continue to stick by the shroud and insist that this is the burial cloth of Jesus after science appeared to completely demolish it?
Right.
Well, there's a few examples that keep coming up again and again and again.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, the samples they took from that shroud for carbon dating. They went to the edge of the thing and they took some. Imagine that. You're cutting away at this thing. You're going to take a little piece. They take a few fibers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they carbon dated it. And they took those samples from the edge of the shroud that had been patched in the Middle Ages. It had been patched in the Middle Ages. There was a disaster. And the new fibers that were patched in the Middle Ages were very carefully interwoven with the old ones. So the argument is, look, the sample that you carbon dated would have been contaminated by these new fibers mixed with the old, and so that's why you got the wrong date.
Sort of a restoration project.
Right. So
Yeah.
they're carbon dating a restoration, not the original.
Okay.
So in 2013, Giulio Fanti of the University of Padua used an alternate method of dating, not carbon dating, but he used one that involved infrared and spectroscopy.
Okay.
There's a word for you, spectroscopy. And he gets a different date, and that date ranges from somewhere between 400 BC and 300 AD.
Okay. Well, and that would easily place the shroud in the right time frame for Jesus' burial in the first century.
Right, which is why people who believe in the shroud stick with this. Okay, Fanti got a date that was closer.
Okay.
Secondly, here's another thing that people point out. The image on the shroud is superficial. It's only on the very top, the very outside of the very top of the fibers themselves. So if you were to scrape off just a fraction of a millimeter off of this thing, the image would disappear. It's only on the very surface, which makes it unlikely, they say, that anybody used paint or some other liquid medium to create it, because that would just get absorbed into the cloth.
It would wick down.
Yeah, it would be all through the cloth. But if you take the top fibers and push them to the side, the next layer down, a microscopic layer down, has no image. We're talking about the width of one fiber. So as somebody I heard once put it, if somebody painted this thing, they used a single-haired paintbrush, which seems unlikely.
Yeah, true.
Thirdly, fans of the shroud suggest that when you take a 3D scanner, a computer scanner, and point it at the cloth, it produces a 3D image of a man. Now, if you take that same scanner and point it at a painting, it doesn't work. You do not get a 3D image of a man. It doesn't work on photographs. It doesn't work on paintings.
That is interesting.
So the thinking is that the cloth was imprinted by something with 3 dimensions, like an actual human corpse. Fourthly,
Okay.
I know I seem to be coming out in favor. I'm not. I'm just telling you what the arguments are.
What the arguments are. Right.
The nail wounds are in the right place, and this is interesting. Historically speaking, the nail wounds in this victim are in the right place. If you look at medieval paintings of the crucifixion, you'll notice they put the nails in the palms of Jesus' hands, which is not historically accurate.
That would not have happened.
Right. The Romans crucified people through the wrist.
Yeah.
Now, the Bible refers to through the hands because everything sort of from just below the wrist up was considered the hands.
Sure.
They crucified people through the wrist for 2 reasons. Number one, your palm isn't strong enough to hold you up.
No.
Nail somebody up on a cross or a wall by their palms, and it's going to pull through the flesh, and they're going to drop to the ground. It's just going to rip off.
That's true.
Secondly, the nail was placed through or by the median nerve in the wrist, which made this as painful as humanly possible. They were trying to make it excruciatingly painful. Excruciating literally means, that's literally what that means, out of the cross, excruciate. Now, some Christians squirm when you point this out. I mentioned this a moment ago because, no, the Bible says he was crucified through his hands. But that's in the first century, in a world that was saturated with Roman ideas, the wrists were considered part of the hands. So the man on the shroud has nail prints in his wrists, not in his palms. So either the painter, the forger, knew something that no one else in his day knew or remembered, or maybe it's the real thing.
Wow. So if it wasn't painted, then how was it made?
Well, that's the mystery. Because to date, nobody has been able to replicate this thing. People have said, it's a forgery, I'll prove it, I'll forge one too.
Right.
And nobody's been able to duplicate it. So the thinking is, now this is among believers in the shroud, somehow they say, when Jesus was raised from the dead, when he received his glorified body, as the Bible puts it,
Right.
somehow that process of healing him and resurrecting him was so brilliant or so heat intensive that it seared his image into the cloth. So it's kind of like what happened in Hiroshima, or Hiroshima, some people. Which one do you say?
I say Hiroshima.
Okay.
Apparently we're on opposite
Yeah,
pronunciation
today we pronounce
scales.
everything differently. In Hiroshima or Hiroshima, when America dropped the A-bomb, the flash of that bomb was so brilliant that to this day you can find shadows of people etched into the sidewalks and walls where they were standing when the bomb went off. The heat and light were so intense that unusual objects begin to act like photographic film. Right.
So kind of like an X-ray where radiation passes through different parts of your body differently, making an image on a film. And in this case, creating a photo negative, as you described earlier, just like when you use a film camera.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, who knows? They're just suggesting that when Jesus rose from the dead, if this is real, and folks, we're not saying it's real, not saying it's fake, that something happened in that tomb. It was so hot, it was so brilliant that it etched a picture of Jesus into the cloth itself, and just on the most superficial fibers, right? Just on the very outside.
On the top layer.
And it happened to be a photographic negative,
Yeah.
right? Instead of being... So if it's a forgery, someone was clever enough to know what the opposites of colors are.
Right.
Right? That the opposite of... Anyway, they were managing to paint a photographic negative.
You know, Sean, I find this whole discussion very fascinating historically. But I think the question that we have to answer in our final segment is, how is this important for Christianity?
Yeah, because whether it's real or not should be neither here nor there for your Christian faith. And so I guess we'll come back to that in a moment. I see they've already got their hands on the controls. The music has started.
Here it
That
goes.
means I'm out of time.
Time for a break.
I'm going to sing. I'm going to sing as we head into our break. What do you think of that?
Well, you can do what you choose, but I
but
wouldn't
maybe
recommend
we'd like the show to survive. We're talking about the Shroud of Turin. Fake or real? Who knows? And we're going to come back in a moment and ask the question, does it matter if it's real? In the meantime, let me tell you what is real. The Word of God is real. We've got a number of resources from children's programming to Bible study that we want you to have access to so that you can find what is real in this universe, and that is a risen Savior. So take down this information and we will be right back.
Are you searching for answers to life's toughest questions? Like, where is God when we suffer? Can I find real happiness? Does my life really matter to God? Or is there any hope for our chaotic world? The Discover Bible Guides will help you find the answers that you're looking for. Visit us at BibleStudies.com or give us a call at 888-456-7933 for your free Discover Bible Guides. Study online on our secure website or have the free guides mailed right to your home. There is never a cost or obligation. The Discover Bible Guides are our free gift to you. Find answers in guides like A Second Chance at Life. You'll find answers to the things that matter the most to you. Visit BibleStudies.com and begin your journey today to discover answers to life's deepest questions.
Well, I don't mean to be a tattletale, but During the break, my wife was throwing paper clips at my head.
Yes, I was.
Why?
I don't know. I'm tired. It seemed entertaining. That's really all there is to it.
This is what life is like here at the Voice of Prophecy, folks. My wife throws things at me when nobody's looking.
Paper clips. Let's clarify that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's where it starts, though.
Oh, is that where it starts?
Next thing you know, you'll be throwing paper weights at my head.
No,
Yeah.
I don't think so.
What do you throw at me when I'm not looking?
Dirty looks. That's about it.
Talking about the shroud. Is it real as it's not, right?
Right.
It doesn't matter. And I would argue, no, it doesn't matter. Not really. I mean, if the shroud is real, let's go there for a second.
Right.
Cool. Right?
Yeah,
Might be the only
definitely.
genuine image of Jesus we have. But does it matter? No. No, it doesn't. I mean, let's suppose, first of all, the shroud is fake. What would that mean for my Christian faith? Well, it would mean that we take another black eye from all the critics out there because, well, here we went again. We built our faith on something that was false. It's kind of like when somebody puts giant wooden feet under their shoes, goes around stomping in the wood to convince people. I can't get the word convince out. It's like when somebody puts fake wooden feet on, runs around in the woods to convince us that Bigfoot is real.
Right, right.
And then when the hoax is discovered, it makes people even less likely to believe in Bigfoot.
Yeah, that's
Right.
true.
Now, in this case, we're not dealing with Bigfoot or aliens or leprechauns. We're dealing with a genuine historical figure, the most
Right.
influential person in all of human history. Right? We're dealing with something that really matters because if the resurrection of Christ is true, if God really came here in human flesh to this world and conquered death in our behalf, that makes all the difference in the world.
Absolutely.
And the last thing Christians need to be doing is trying to prove that it happened by making stuff up or circulating urban legends.
Yeah.
See,
Yeah.
you and I might not be making artificial death shrouds or trying to force miracles or fake them. But maybe we as modern Christians should hesitate just a little bit before we pass on those emails or Facebook posts that say, ooh, NASA discovered a missing day in the universe. Because it's not true. They didn't. That's an old legend. But sometimes as Christians, we see something like that. We jump all over it as proof, of, well, in that case, the long day mentioned in the Old Testament. But then when it's finally revealed that somebody made that up, it gives us all a black eye, and it makes people unwilling to examine the genuine claims of the Christian faith.
Right, right. And those genuine claims are found in Scripture, not in chain letters or on the internet. And the New Testament has the disciples saying that they saw Jesus back from the dead in person. And at no point, I suppose, do they bring out his burial cloth and say, see, use it as proof. When he rose from the dead, it burned his picture into the cloth.
Right.
We don't hear them saying that.
Right. So if it was real, let's say one of the disciples grabbed the shroud from the tomb. They obviously, if they had it, if they did, if they did, they didn't think it was important enough to mention it.
That's true.
If it was real, they didn't use it as proof.
Right, right. So let's say that it is real. What would that mean for us?
Well, it would mean it's interesting.
Yeah.
And that's it. Right? That's about it.
Yeah.
You'll notice in the Old Testament that when the Israelites had a religious relic in their midst for a while, and that was the bronze serpent that Moses lifted up in the wilderness as a lesson in faith. Right. The Israelites had fallen prey to poisonous snakes,
Right.
and they looked up to this serpent on a pole and they were healed. That symbol was meant to point forward to the moment when Jesus would be lifted up on a cross and, as he put it, draw all mankind to himself.
Yes.
That serpent on a pole was a type or a symbol of the crucifixion, a symbol pointing forward. So in that regard, it was every bit a memento of the cross as the shroud would be, right? A divine miracle related to the sacrifice of Christ on the cross. But let's consider that serpent on a pole. Look at 2 Kings 18, verse 4. When righteous King Hezekiah comes to power. Here's what it says, 2 Kings 18, verse 3.
Okay.
I'll start in verse 3. And he, Hezekiah, did what was right in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father David had done. He removed the high places and broke the sacred pillars, cut down the wooden image, and broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made. For until those days, the children of Israel burned incense to it and called it Nehushtan.
What does that mean?
Means the bronze thing.
Okay. Okay.
It means the bronze thing. But they were worshiping, instead of worshiping the God who healed them,
Right.
instead of working out that all-important covenant relationship with their Creator, they started venerating
This
a mere
image.
object.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
God had Hezekiah destroy it at that point. So let's suppose the Shroud of Turin is real. I would be interested in seeing it?
Definitely.
Yeah, sure.
I would.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just as curious as the next guy. What
Sure.
if it's a picture of Jesus? Yeah, I'd be curious, right? If the shroud is authentic, then suddenly it could become a powerful touch point, right? Almost a historical or an historical. Do you say ahistorical or
Historical.
an historical?
Historical is, I guess, how
an
I say
historical?
it.
Well, it becomes a historical anchor for what is essentially a historical faith. Christianity is a historical faith. Here's a historical object that proves it's historical. But that's where things go wrong. We have this tendency that we want to start treating these religious relics like more than just an interesting museum piece. We treat them like a fetish or an amulet.
Yeah.
And we start to think them as objects that are imbued somehow with supernatural power.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know we like to think that in the 21st century we're too sophisticated to do something like that.
No.
But hurting people do this all the time. I see people send away for miraculous healing water or healing oil from some fraudulent TV evangelist, and people do this all the time because they're hurting and they're desperate. So when we're presented with the possibility that we have the death shroud of Jesus himself, well, a lot of people are going to venerate the shroud instead of actually entering into a relationship with God.
So, in other words, it really becomes a form of idolatry.
Yeah,
is what
exactly.
happens.
That's what it is. And we need to remember, additionally, that the Christian faith is not essentially rooted in miracles.
Right.
That's not what it is. Now, there's no doubt we've got miracles in the Bible, right? In Old and New Testament.
Yep.
I still see miracles happen to this day. I've seen it with my own eyes. But that's not what our faith is built on. That's not the foundation of the Christian faith. As you said, Gene, if the disciples actually had the shroud, they apparently didn't think it was important enough to bring it out during their sermons.
Right.
There's no display of the shroud in the book of Acts. Instead, what they shared were two different things. When they got with an audience, they didn't pull out a relic. They shared the prophecies of the Bible, would have been the Old Testament, that pointed forward to the coming Messiah. They were using the prophecies as evidence that Jesus was Messiah, and then they added to that their own personal testimony. We saw him rise from the dead, and my life has been changed.
Right.
But they didn't rely on relics. So if that's not how the church got started in what was easily one of its most successful phases back in the first century, and during this time period, they managed to carry the gospel to the entire Roman Empire in one generation, and they did it on foot.
It's amazing.
Right.
Yeah.
If they didn't use relics to do that, then it's highly doubtful that you and I are supposed to do it that way today.
That's a really good point. Sean, our discussion reminds me of the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, where
Right.
you remember the rich man begs that Lazarus be raised from the dead to go and convince his brothers of the truth. And Abraham says, if they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, though one rise from the dead.
Right.
Which, of course, was certainly true in Jesus' ministry. He did raise somebody from the dead, a man named Lazarus, and still his critics wouldn't believe him.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you find that story in Luke chapter 16. And in this parable that Jesus tells, this is one in a long series of parables.
Right.
You have this guy saying, would you please raise someone from the dead, go and tell my brothers to not make the wrong decision. And as you say, the answer from Abraham in this parable is if they won't listen to the scriptures, they're not even going to be persuaded if someone rises from the dead.
Right. No miracle can persuade them.
The Christian faith is not based in miracles. Does God work miracles?
Yes.
Of course he does. I've seen them with my... Now, God does not work miracles to entertain the saints. I can tell you that. What goes on in a lot of Western Christianity is an abysmal thing. People are waiting for miracles to take place in church. They treat it like entertainment and so on. Now, God works miracles to advance the cause of the gospel as needed. And if you want to see those, you need to be on the front lines of evangelism. If you want to see the real... And I've seen
very
that.
true.
But God does not base his credibility on whether or not he performs miracles. That's not who the God of the Bible is. And of course, in Revelation chapter 13, we've got this situation. We've got a last day scenario. You've got a first beast that comes out of the sea, a second beast that comes out of the earth. And the second beast supports the first beast and tries to convince the world to worship the first beast. You read about it in Revelation 13. And in that case, all the signs and wonders are taking place in the wrong camp. The second beast is bringing down fire from heaven in the sight of men, it says. He's performing the miracles. And so the miracle's in the wrong place. In Revelation 16, you've got this situation where the spirits of demons perform signs. They go and work signs and wonders in the whole world. And so you've got demons performing signs. In the last days, according to Scripture, the miracles are taking place in the wrong places. So that's why we have to be careful as Christians to remember that our faith is not rooted in the miraculous.
Right.
The Christian faith isn't a magic show. It's not what it is. And whether or not the shroud is real is irrelevant to whether or not I believe Jesus rose from the dead. I don't need the shroud to believe that. I don't need that at all. This isn't a magic show. This is a relationship with a living God. And that living God wants to enter into a covenant relationship with us. That's where God wants to meet us, in our hearts and in our minds. That's where He speaks to us. He doesn't do it with a magic show on a stage. Now, it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. You and I both have seen God answer prayer in unbelievable ways.
Yes.
But all through the Bible, the miracles are actually few and far between. When you consider the fact that the miracles take place over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and you sort of tally them and spread them out, it's not that many. They're few and far between. And usually God performs those miracles to deal with very special circumstances, sometimes to deal with outsiders, like, well, when He parts the Red Sea to save His people, and then He uses the Red Sea again to deal with the Egyptians and drown them.
That's true.
In the end.
And that was for a very specific purpose. It was to rescue His people and to save them.
That's it, right? So in that parable that you were reading, where He says, even if someone were to come back from the dead, and He says, well, even if someone did come back from the dead, in that case, Jesus is kind of pointing down the road a few years because He raised His best friend, Lazarus, from the dead. And the religious leaders of His day still didn't buy it. And what He's saying is, look, if you don't respond to the voice of the Spirit, and the Holy Spirit brings conviction when you read the Word of God, if you're not responding to that, a miracle is not going to put you over the line. It's just not going to do it. It has never worked in history. So the shroud, let's say that it is a miracle. Let's say the day Jesus rose from the dead, it burned His image onto that cloth, and it really is a picture of Jesus. I say, cool.
Yeah,
I say
it's neat.
It's cool. But does my faith fall or rise on whether or not that thing is a fake?
Absolutely not.
Again, what happens if they prove it to be a complete fake? It's complete fake. And everybody based their faith on it and trotted it around and see, there's proof Jesus rose from the dead. It's going to discredit Christianity and stop a lot of people from examining the claims. So for me, the shroud goes in the what if column. And if it is real, it's cool. And if it's not real, still kind of cool because somebody really did a good job of faking it.
Did a good job.
You know, what's ultimately important is what was the focus of the early Christians in the early church, the empty tomb, that Jesus did rise.
Right.
That's what's important here.
Which is why, again, early Christian art featured an empty tomb. And it wasn't really for a couple hundred years or more that we had pictures of crosses or crucifixion or that kind of thing, which is why on some days I lean towards it's a fake because, I don't know.
It's fascinating.
How about that?
We
spent a whole hour for me to say, I don't know.
Well,
and I can fill hours and hours and hours with stuff I don't know. But that music tells me we're out of time. You need to open the Word of God and study it. That's where faith is based. It's on a relationship with a living and real God, not on a relic that may or may not be 2,000 years old. Is it fascinating? Yes. But the God that you meet is not met in an ancient relic. The God you meet is in the pages of the Bible. And so until next time, I encourage you, sit down, open that Bible, and meet that God. You've been listening to Disclosure. This is Sean and Jean Boonstra. Until next time.